great bands in Toronto. You know, there's bands like, you know, that we've already talked about, bands like the Bottoms, the Diodes. They get a lot of the press, but the Dishes are this band that kind of happened right before all of that. That kind of gets like, you know, really next to no credit because they aren't totally a punk band. They're like a little bit Roxy music. They've got a saxophone and they have kind of all this other stuff going on. This band kind of forms in the OCA scene, you know, kind of around like 76, and Queen Street is like nothing. There is nothing cool here at all. And basically this band is a bunch of art students who kind of get together and start writing original music, and they start putting together shows at the Beverly Tavern. Because this is a time when you can't play original music in a bar. Because bars are just trying to sell beer, and you sell beer by having a band on stage playing, you know, top 40 contemporary rock and roll. So the Dishes go down to the Beverly, it's this shitty bar, no one's drinking in it, the second floor is basically abandoned, and they ask to book a show, and they bring all these OCA students who drink a lot of beer. And all of a sudden you have this bar right near an arts college that's putting on original rock shows. And that is kind of the beginning of Queen Street West. I don't know what your sort of relationship with Dishes is like.
I think it's like, it's always like this misnomer that's kind of like perpetuated by a lot of like music press that like punk starts here at this time or punk starts there at this time, but like Teenage Head started playing shows, like their first shows at some high school in like 74, like that's when the Ramones started practicing.
But the crazy thing is you have these bands, you have Simply Saucer and Hamilton, you have the Dishes in Toronto that are like laying the groundwork. You know, they don't necessarily get the credit, but they are these genuine proto-punk bands in the same way that people describe the Stooges, in the same way people describe, you know, those early, you know, Ohio bands like Rock from the Tombs and whatnot. They're sort of setting up what is going to happen because you did not have postering on Queen Street West before the Dishes. That's something we completely take for granted. 2 chords.
Oh man.
Anyway, that song's incredible. But here's why it's so. Here's my opinion why this is so fucking important. So this record comes out. Vile Records puts this record out. You know, it comes out, gets a copy. A copy gets to Washington D.C., where a bunch of kids buy it that are mainly into jazz music, and they're like getting into punk, right? They're all black kids from Washington D.C. and they're like getting into punk music, and they pick up the single. And they love this song, Screaming Fist. So they start jamming this song, right? They're just playing in the basement, all these local kids. The band is the Bad Brains before HR even joins. They used to jam Screaming Fist. Rollins talks about it in this book, how he used to go see them pre-HR joining the band. They would just be with Daryl Jennifer singing Screaming Fist, rocking out, playing Screaming Fist.
So the Slime are like these university students at MUN Radio in St. John's on Christmas Eve, 2007, 1977. These guys are just kicking around, and they set up a bunch of mics, and they record a song called Piss-Eyed Sleazoid. And they kind of jam around, they do a couple instrumentals, and they're like, okay, well, you know, we'll come back again. And so on Christmas Day, 1977, this band, The Slime, goes into their college radio station and records another bunch of songs. And they, in 1977, become one of the first Canadian punk bands, and they are in St. John's, Newfoundland. I mean, like, it boggles the mind. But what is, I think, the most incredible thing about St. John's, Newfoundland is that in 1977, they had two punk bands. Two punk bands. It's insane! So this is a band called The Reaction, who just put out in the last couple of years, put out a discography called Old and New. There's a song called In Tune with the Times that is ripping and totally good, and from St. John's. Like the Slime were like, they were like university students, and they were just kind of hanging out, and they were doing their bring your own safety pin shows. But The Reaction were like a gigging band. It was their job. So even though they wanted to write original music, they still had to sustain a living touring Newfoundland. So they were playing tiny fishing villages all over the island of Newfoundland. They're playing Corner Brook, they're playing Dildo, they're playing whatever fishing villages near like Gross Moor. This is living in poverty by the extroverts. So these guys were like the very first punk band in Saskatchewan, which again I think is, it's like on par with being the first band in, St. John's and Newfoundland. These people were like kids, kind of like, those, a lot of us that were just like, this sucks. Like everything that I am being fed on the radio, everything that I'm hearing on TV, on variety shows, this is all shit. And I don't even know what to look to for an alternative. And then you just have, in every city, kind of around the same time, this just organic explosion. So the Extroverts were this band whose very first show was opening for the Rocky Horror Picture Show at like a college event because there were no punk shows to play anywhere in Saskatchewan. And they ended up finding a Hungarian restaurant called the Schnitzel House that this nice Hungarian couple had sort of set up a back room, and they wanted to have like wedding receptions and stuff there, but nobody was booking it, and so them and their manager kind of went in and they were like, hey, we want to have a punk show here. So they had the Monday Night Pogo where DOA played and they opened, and that was the first punk show at the Schnitzel House, which actually turned into a full-on live music venue that only closed like 2 weeks ago. It's called The District, and it lasted forever. And there were 3 punk bands in Winnipeg. They played a show at the University of Manitoba, and only one of them properly recorded. It was this band, Lowlife, who did a 7-inch called Leaders. But they actually break up before it ever comes out because the guitar player Richard Duguay, who goes on to play in The Kill, and then Personality Crisis, one of like my favorite bands ever. Cover of Leaders is all of these like fascist leaders, and it's called Leaders. It's a song that sounds like it's skewering fascism, but it's actually about the singer of the band because Richard, the guitar player, hated him so much, and they were folding the singles together in their parents' basement, in Mark Alderson, the drummer's basement, and it just like, things got so tense that Richard Duguay ended up tackling the singer of the band and punching him in the face, and so the band broke up in the middle of assembling these records. That are now like highly sought after. Yeah. And of course, Personality Crisis, Creatures for a While is I think one of the greatest hardcore records, ever. The Subhumans of DOA kind of have this like weird shared history of living in like Cherryville, BC, being like trying to live completely off the grid and play only acoustic instruments. Their very first show, because originally it was like Joe, and it was Mike, and it was Wimpy Roy, and all these guys, from DOA and the Subhumans played in a single band called The Icon, called The Resurrection, called Stone Crazy, a million different names. Their very first show was playing The Wake of a Logger. Like, this is how BC...
Which is an awesome story in the book.
It's the most Canadian thing you could do as a punk band, I think. Like, that if someone was like, if it was a Molson Canadian beer ad, it would, that would be the little sort of picture they would paint. But the Subhumans, Incorrect Thoughts is one of the greatest punk rock records of all time. Out of print and illegal for the band to repress. So the Subhumans, of course, like, this record has been out of print. You can kind of get it now. You can get it on the internet. But one of the things for me, and I don't know what your take on this, that kind of like looms a little large of the whole Subhuman story, is the Jerry Hanna from the band who wrote, "Slave to My Dick," one of the most popular Subhuman songs for a fairly conscious band, kind of a funny song.
But it's also like it's very political.
Well,
it also goes into what he was accused artist convicted.
Well, yeah, so Jerry Hanna was a part of a group called Direct Action that ended up being known as the Vancouver Five or the Squamish Five, depending on, which side of the political fence that you're on. Their big sort of thing was that they were responsible for the Lytton Industries bombing that happened in Toronto in the 80s, where they basically detonated a whole car full of, a bunch of explosives, intended, just to, dismantle this plant that was constructing, missiles, and ended up sort of severely injuring one of the security workers, kind of an innocent guy. And then they were planning to rob a Brinks truck with automatic weapons when they were all arrested, and a bunch of them went to jail for a really long time. Jerry Hanna went to jail for a really long time, was on probation for a really long time. And this was sort of this weird splinter thing that kind of happened in the 80s in the punk scene, where for some people the Subhumans were super legit because they were very political, and they had this guy who he was just, Direct Action firebombed a bunch of adult video stores in Vancouver. They were
just Slaves to My Dick, kind of like,
That's what that's really about.
Should have known when you wrote that song he was going to be a terrorist.
So, for some people it legitimized them. For other people it was sort of, just an inexcusable act of violence. To my mind, one of the great things about Vancouver is that you had DOA that were this like very serious hardcore band, Subhumans that were a very melodic but at the same time very serious hardcore band. Then you had Pointed Sticks who like literally have a song called Somebody's Mom, which I think is just like this perfect little song. That's not it. This is Somebody's Mom. The reason that the book is called Perfect Youth is because it was this last record that they did that kind of just got like super weird, where they got signed to Stiff Records, which put out Elvis Costello and put out New Rose by the Damned, like the very first UK punk single. And so they were kind of shopping around in Vancouver, heard Vancouver had a good scene, signed the Pointed Sticks, which like really would have changed the course of punk history in this country. And so they go over to England, and they're being like driven to the recording studio, and there's posters up on like all the walls. It's like Motorhead, 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 Pointed Sticks, Motorhead, Motorhead, Pointed Sticks. And it kind of gets in their heads. It like completely screws them up. And the record ends up being terrible. And Stiff Records drops them, and they just sort of go back to Vancouver with their tail between their legs, kind of trying to figure out what to do next. They end up with a sax player in the band, and it's sort of never the same.
Little spotty.
It gets a little dodgy. You talk to them, they're like, it was fun, but we had a sax player.
Yeah.
So, that to me is sort of like why, on some level, the Pointed Sticks made the suitable title for the book, because I think it's kind of like, they were this perfect band. They were so good that they got picked up by one of the best record labels in the world at that time, and then somewhere along the line it went wrong and they did not get the recognition they deserved. And that to me is the story of all of these bands.
All these bands have kind of that story, you know what I mean?
We're done, guys. Thank you, Damian. A round of applause for Damian.
Hey, give it up for Sam!
And me. Also, we're both great. We're both great. Copies of the book and copies of Simon's records are for sale over there. I'll be hanging out if you want me to sign them and like be super rad. Thank you so much everyone for coming out. Thank you to ECW for putting out this book, because honestly, whether it was me or whoever it was, I think it's a story that needs to be told. And I hope you guys will agree. And I hope you guys enjoy Arson. Thank you for coming for the launch for Perfect Youth, the birth of Canadian punk.